On the edge of the dry plains, where the wind carried dust like whispered judgments and the sun showed no mercy, there stood a lonely ranch that most folks avoided. It belonged to Caleb Harlan, a cowboy known more for his silence than his smile. People said he was cold. Others said he was cursed. A few claimed he had buried his heart along with his wife years ago and never looked back. What no one ever said was that he was cruel. Yet when a widowed woman was sent to him like unwanted cargo, even Caleb himself didn't understand why fate had chosen his door again. Her name was Eliza Moore, and the day she arrived, she carried nothing but a small trunk, a worn shawl, and the weight of a family's rejection pressing down on her shoulders. Her husband had died less than a year earlier, leaving her with no child, no inheritance, and no place in the crowded house of her relatives. In their eyes, she had become a burden, a reminder of loss, a woman without a man in a world that didn't forgive such things easily. The family gathered one evening and decided her future as if she were a problem to be solved. Someone mentioned Caleb Harlan, the widowed cowboy who lived alone miles outside town. Send her there, an uncle said with a shrug. He needs a woman to cook and clean. She needs a roof. Let fate deal with the rest. They dressed it up as charity, but everyone knew the truth. It was punishment, exile, a quiet way to be rid of her. So Eliza was sent away without ceremony. No hugs lingered. No promises were made. As the wagon carried her farther from the only life she had known, her hands trembled in her lap, but her chin stayed lifted. She had learned early that tears rarely softened hearts. When Caleb saw the wagon approaching his gate, his first instinct was irritation. He hadn't asked for company. He had built his life carefully around solitude. The land, the cattle, the routine, they asked little and gave enough. A person, especially one sent by others, was unpredictable. The driver explained the situation quickly, avoiding Caleb's eyes. A widow. No place else to go. They said you'd take her, the man muttered, already turning the horses. Caleb looked at Eliza standing there, the dust clinging to her skirt, her eyes tired but steady. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He could have said no. He knew that. He also knew what saying no would mean for her. Another road. Another rejection. House is small, he said finally. Work is hard. I'm not afraid of work, Eliza replied softly. That was all it took. Caleb stepped aside and let her pass. The early days were awkward and quiet. Eliza learned the rhythms of the ranch quickly, rising before dawn, tending to meals, mending clothes, helping where she could. Caleb kept his distance, speaking only when necessary. He slept in the far room and ate quickly, as if afraid that too much presence might awaken something he had buried. Eliza noticed everything. The way he fixed a broken fence with care, even when no one would see. The way he spoke to the horses like old friends. The sadness that crept into his eyes at sunset, when the sky turned the same color as old wounds. At night, alone in her small room, Eliza wondered if this exile would be her forever. She had lost a husband she had barely begun to build a life with. Now she lived with a man who looked like he had lost everything and chosen to remain among the ruins. But something unexpected happened as the weeks passed. The ranch began to change. Caleb came home one evening to the smell of fresh bread and stew simmering on the stove. Not rushed food. Not survival meals. Real care poured into simple things. He hadn't realized how long it had been since his house felt alive. Eliza planted a small garden near the house, coaxing green life from stubborn soil. She hummed softly while she worked, a sound so gentle it startled Caleb the first time he heard it. It reminded him of mornings long ago, when laughter had lived in these walls. He didn't thank her. Not yet. But he noticed. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast and angry. Caleb was late returning from the far pasture, and Eliza stood on the porch, her shawl pulled tight, worry etched across her face. When he finally appeared through the rain, soaked and tired, he saw her waiting. You didn't have to stand there, he said gruffly. I wanted to, she answered. Something shifted then. Small, almost invisible, but real. Word in town traveled faster than the wind. People whispered that the widowed woman had been sent away to live with the cold cowboy. Some shook their heads, expecting trouble. Others smirked, convinced she would fail, crawl back, or disappear entirely. Instead, months passed, and Eliza did not return. When Caleb went to town for supplies, he noticed the looks. Curious. Judging. He felt a strange urge to defend her, even though no one spoke aloud. When a man joked crudely about the widow he kept, Caleb's fist hit the counter hard enough to crack the wood. "She's under my roof," he said calmly. "That's all you need to know." The silence that followed was heavy with surprise. At the ranch, winter crept in. Nights grew long and cold. One evening, the fire burned low, and the house felt too quiet. Eliza sat mending a coat, her fingers slow, her eyes distant. "My husband used to sit just there," she said suddenly, nodding toward the empty chair across the room. "He wasn't perfect, but he was kind." Caleb swallowed. "My wife sang while she cooked," he replied after a moment. "I used to pretend I didn't listen." They shared a smile then. Soft, careful. Two people standing at the edge of old grief, recognizing it in each other. From that night on, they talked more. Not about love, not about the future, just about small things. Weather, land, memories that no longer hurt quite as sharply when spoken aloud. Caleb began fixing the house properly, not just patching what was broken. Eliza laughed more. Real laughter, the kind that surprised her. The ranch no longer felt like a punishment to either of them. Spring came slowly, bringing color back to the plains. One morning, Caleb watched Eliza kneeling in the garden, sunlight catching in her hair, and realized something that frightened him more than loneliness ever had. He cared, not out of need, not out of habit, but because she had become part of his world without asking permission. When he finally spoke, it wasn't grand or rehearsed. "You know you're free to leave," he said one evening, "if you want more than this." Eliza looked at him for a long time. "I know," she replied, "but I don't feel trapped here. For the first time since my husband died, I feel chosen." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. "I didn't choose you because they sent you," he said quietly. "I choose you because you stayed." They did not rush. Love, when it finally came, was built the way strong things always are, slowly, honestly, without spectacle. When Caleb took Eliza's hand for the first time, it felt less like claiming something new and more like finding something lost. The town noticed the change before they ever made it official. Caleb smiled more. Eliza walked beside him with quiet confidence. The whispers shifted, turning from judgment to curiosity, then to respect. The family who had sent her away came calling eventually, dressed in polite words and false warmth. Eliza met them at the gate, Caleb standing at her side. "I'm not coming back," she said calmly. "I was sent here as punishment. I stayed because I was treated as treasure." They left without argument, their pride wounded in ways no words could fix. Years later, people would tell the story differently. They'd say the widowed woman found love with the lonely cowboy. They'd say the ranch was saved, the man healed, the woman redeemed. But the truth was simpler and stronger. A woman discarded by her own blood was given space to become herself again. A man who thought his heart was buried learned it had only been waiting. What was meant as punishment became grace. What was meant to break her became the place she finally belonged. And on a quiet stretch of land beneath endless sky, two wounded souls built a life not out of pity or duty, but out of choice, turning rejection into the greatest treasure either of them had ever known.